August 5th, 1532, just before dawn. The fortress of Kőszeg stands in western Hungary, a cluster of stone towers and medieval walls rising from marshland near the Austrian border. Morning mist crawls up from the flooded moats that circle the town, and everything is quiet in that heavy way that comes before violence. Captain Nikola Jurišić stands on the eastern rampart, a Croatian soldier in his early 40s who has spent most of his life defending borders that keep moving. He is watching the horizon, and what he sees there is ending the last peaceful morning this place will know for a month. Dust. A massive cloud of it, growing larger as the sun climbs, spreading across the hills like a stain. Beneath that dust is an army that has already crushed 17 fortresses in the last few weeks, and it is coming here next. Jurišić knows the numbers because his scouts have been counting for days. The Ottoman Empire has sent somewhere between 100,000 and 140,000 men into Hungary this summer, and a significant portion of that force is now marching toward his walls. He looks down at his own garrison. 46 professional soldiers, 700 townspeople holding whatever weapons they could find. No cannons, a few muskets. 4,000 civilians huddled in churches and cellars, praying that stone will be enough. It will not be enough. The math is impossible. But Jurišić is not here to win. He is here to delay. And delay means dying slowly instead of quickly, which is the only choice left when an empire decides your fortress is in the way. Vienna lies 3 days to the northwest, unprepared and vulnerable, the capital of the Habsburg dynasty and the gateway to the rest of Europe. If Kőszeg falls in a day, Suleiman the Magnificent will reach Vienna in 4. If it falls in a week, maybe Charles V can assemble a relief force. If it holds longer than that, something nobody expects might happen. Jurišić made his decision days ago, when Ferdinand I gave him the option to evacuate. He stayed. His men stayed. And now the dust cloud is close enough that he can see individual banners moving inside it. The crescent standards of an empire that has been winning for a century. This tiny fortress, barely a dot on the maps being studied in Istanbul and Vienna and Rome, is about to do what entire kingdoms could not. It is about to stop Suleiman the Magnificent. And if you stay with me through the next 25 days, you will see how 800 men changed the fate of Europe, with nothing but stone walls and stubborn courage. To understand why one Croatian captain and a few hundred terrified townspeople are standing on these walls waiting to die, you have to go back 6 years to a muddy field in southern Hungary where the Kingdom of Hungary died in an afternoon. August 29th, 1526, the Battle of Mohacs. King Louis II of Hungary led his army against Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, and it went exactly as badly as everyone feared. The Hungarians were slaughtered. Louis drowned fleeing the battlefield, weighed down by his armour in a stream that should not have killed a king, but did. When the news reached Europe, it felt like the ground had shifted. Hungary had been the shield wall of Christendom for 2 centuries, the barrier that kept the Ottoman Empire from pouring into Austria and Germany and Italy. Now that shield was broken. The kingdom fractured into 3 pieces almost immediately. The western and northern parts fell to Ferdinand I of Austria, the Habsburg Archduke who claimed the throne through his wife, Louis's sister. The central territories, including the old capital of Buda, became Ottoman Hungary, directly controlled from Istanbul. And Transylvania in the east became a puppet kingdom under John Zapolya, a Hungarian nobleman who chose vassalage over extinction. For a while, an uneasy stalemate held. Then, in 1529, Suleiman came back. He marched an army of 120,000 men up through the Balkans and laid siege to Vienna itself, the Habsburg capital, trying to finish what Mohács had started. He failed. Not because the Austrians defeated him in some glorious battle, but because October came early that year, and the rains turned the roads to rivers, and his supply lines collapsed. And even the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire cannot fight winter. He withdrew, furious and humiliated, leaving Vienna standing. Ferdinand saw an opportunity. In 1530, he launched a counter-offensive into Ottoman Hungary, reclaiming some of the territory Suleiman had taken. It was a bold move and a stupid one, because it gave Suleiman exactly the justification he needed to come back with an even larger army and finish the job. Which brings us to 1532, and to Kőszeg, and to the man standing on those walls. Suleiman the Magnificent is 38 years old this summer, and he is not called magnificent as a courtesy. He is the 10th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and probably the most dangerous man alive. He has held the throne for 12 years, and in that time he has conquered Belgrade, taken the island of Rhodes from the Knights Hospitaller, shattered the Hungarian kingdom at Mohács, and pushed his borders deeper into Europe than any sultan before him. He does not just command armies. He is the commander of the faithful, the shadow of God on earth, the inheritor of Rome and Byzantium, and every empire that thought it would last forever. And he is methodical. When Suleiman decides to invade, he does not gamble. He prepares. This 5th imperial campaign has been in planning for months, and it shows. The army that left Istanbul in May is the largest he has ever assembled. The vanguard alone is larger than most European armies. And as that force marched northwest through the Balkans and into Hungary, it did not struggle. 17 fortresses stood in its path. 17 fortresses fell. Some surrendered without a fight when they saw the banners approaching. Some held out for a day or two before the walls came down. None of them mattered. They were obstacles, not threats, and Suleiman cleared them the way you clear brush from a road. By the time his army reaches Kőszeg on August 5th, the pattern is established. The Ottomans arrive, the cannons fire, the walls break, the garrison surrenders or dies. Then the army moves on. Kőszeg is supposed to be number 18. It will not be. The man running the day-to-day operations of this campaign is not Suleiman himself, but his Grand Vizier, a former Christian slave from Greece named Ibrahim Pasha. Ibrahim is roughly the same age as the Sultan, and the two of them grew up together, a rare friendship in a world built on hierarchy and suspicion. Suleiman trusts him the way emperors rarely trust anyone, which is why Ibrahim holds more power than almost any Grand Vizier in Ottoman history. He commands the armies when Suleiman delegates. He negotiates treaties. He administers an empire that stretches from the Persian Gulf to the gates of Vienna. He is brilliant, ruthless, and efficient, and he has won every campaign he has ever led. Egypt fell to him. Mohács was partly his victory. The unsuccessful siege of Vienna in 1529 was his responsibility, which makes this campaign personal. He wants Vienna, and Kőszeg is in the way, and Ibrahim Pasha does not tolerate obstacles. Over the next month, he will personally lead 19 separate assaults on this fortress, trying to break it through sheer repetition and violence. It will not work, and his failure here will haunt him. 4 years from now, in 1536, Suleiman will have him strangled to death in the palace. the victim of court intrigues and his own accumulated enemies. But Ibrahim does not know that yet. Right now, he is staring at a small fortress that he expects to fall in 3 days, maybe 4, and he is already planning the march to Vienna. Standing against him is Nikola Jurišić, and almost everything about Jurišić is the opposite of Ibrahim Pasha. Where Ibrahim commands an empire's resources, Jurišić commands a garrison that could fit in a large church. Where Ibrahim has won every battle, Jurišić is here to lose slowly. Where Ibrahim is fighting for glory and conquest, Jurišić is fighting to buy time for people who might not even remember his name. He was born around 1490 in Senj, a coastal fortress town in Croatia that spent most of its existence getting attacked by someone. He grew up in a world where the Ottoman Empire was always advancing, and Christendom was always retreating. And he learned early that you survive by being stubborn and clever, not heroic. By 1532, he is in his early 40s, a career soldier who has spent the last decade defending the Hungarian-Croatian border. Ferdinand I made him the supreme commander of the Habsburg border forces after Mohacs, which sounds impressive until you realize it mostly meant organizing the survivors and trying to hold a frontier that kept collapsing. Jurišić knows the Ottomans better than most Christian commanders because he has negotiated with them. Twice, in 1529 and 1530, Ferdinand sent him to Constantinople to try to arrange a peace. He sat across from Ottoman officials, including possibly Ibrahim Pasha himself, and tried to bargain for a kingdom that no longer existed. The negotiations failed, but Jurišić learned something valuable. He learned that the Ottomans respect strength and nothing else, that they will offer generous surrender terms right up until they do not need to, and that the only way to survive against them is to make victory so expensive they decide it is not worth the cost. Which is exactly what he plans to do at Kőszeg. Ferdinand's orders were clear. Hold as long as possible. No one defined possible, which means Jurišić gets to decide when the math becomes too brutal to continue. He knows he is expendable. Ferdinand has already written him off. The real defense of Austria will happen at Vienna, if it happens at all. Kőszeg is just supposed to buy time, and time is measured in days of resistance, and days are measured in bodies. The stakes here are not just military, they are civilizational. If Kőszeg falls quickly, Suleiman reaches Vienna in early August with a rested army and 3 months of good weather left. Vienna's defences are incomplete. The relief army Charles V is trying to assemble in Germany is not ready. The city could fall, and if Vienna falls, the Habsburg dynasty might not survive it. Austria could become another Hungary, partitioned between Ottoman occupation and desperate resistance. And beyond Austria lies the rest of Europe, already fracturing under the pressure of the Protestant Reformation, already exhausted from decades of religious conflict. The timing could not be worse. The Holy Roman Empire is barely holding together. France, under King Francis I, is actively allied with the Ottomans against the Habsburgs, which means no help is coming from the West. The German princes are divided between Catholics and Protestants, and neither side trusts the other enough to fully commit to defending Vienna. Even the Pope's influence is weaker than it has been in centuries. If Suleiman breaks through now, there is no united Christian coalition waiting to stop him. There is just geography and weather, and whatever delaying actions men like Jurišić can manage. So the 4,000 civilians huddled inside Kőszeg are not just sheltering from a siege. They are the pivot point for the future of Central Europe, whether they know it or not. 1,800 women, 2,300 children and elderly, 700 men holding weapons most of them barely know how to use. They did not choose this. The war came to them, the way it always does to people living on borders. And now their choice is between trusting these walls or fleeing into a countryside already devastated by the Ottoman advance. Most of them chose the walls. We do not know exactly what Jurišić said to his men on the morning of August 5th, as the Ottoman vanguard crested the hills and the dust cloud resolved into banners and horses and the glint of metal under the rising sun. The sources do not record a speech, but we know what he did. He stayed on the walls. He organized the defense. He positioned his 46 soldiers at key points and filled the gaps with militia. He sent the women and children to the innermost keep and the churches, where stone was thickest. He made sure every man knew where to go when the cannons started firing, because the cannons were absolutely going to start firing. And then he waited, because there was nothing else to do. The Ottoman army was coming, methodical and unstoppable, and Kőszeg was about to find out if stubbornness could substitute for strength. The fortress of Kőszeg is not impressive by the standards of the great castles of Europe. It does not have the massive curtain walls of Constantinople or the layered defences of Vienna. It is a border fort, built over centuries by people who knew they would be attacked and wanted to make that attack as miserable as possible. The design is pragmatic, almost ugly. An inner castle with 4 corner towers sits at the centre, surrounded by multiple baileys and an outer town wall that circles the entire settlement. 9 separate defensive walls in total, each one a fallback position if the one in front of it breaks. The whole complex is maybe 800 metres across at its widest point, compact enough that a defender on one wall can see most of the others. And surrounding everything, like a moat designed by someone who understood physics, is the Gyöngyös River. Generations ago, the people of Kőszeg diverted the river to flow around the fortress, creating a water barrier that is wider and deeper than most castle moats. But they did not stop there. They also engineered a system of canals and sluices that can flood the low ground around the walls, turning the entire approach into marshland. By August of 1532, those fields are deliberately saturated. The ground is soft, muddy, and treacherous. You cannot charge across it. You cannot easily place heavy artillery on it. And if you try to dig a mine, the tunnel fills with water before you get halfway to the walls. This is terrain as a weapon, and it matters more than anything else in the coming siege. The Ottoman army that arrives on August 5th is built for open battle and rapid conquest, not for this kind of grinding, miserable siege warfare. Suleiman has brought somewhere between 120,000 and 140,000 men on this campaign, though the numbers vary depending on which chronicler you trust. Not all of them are at Kőszeg. The army is too large to concentrate on a single small fortress, and Suleiman has detached forces to garrison captured towns and guard his supply lines. But the force that encircles Kőszeg is still enormous. Estimates range from 50,000 to 80,000 soldiers, and even the lower number is more than enough to overwhelm the defenders if this were a fair fight. At the core of the Ottoman army are the Janissaries, the elite infantry corps that has terrified Christian Europe for a century. They are former Christian boys taken from their families as children through the devshirme system, converted to Islam and trained into the most disciplined soldiers in the world. By 1532, there are somewhere between 12,000 and 15,000 Janissaries in Suleiman's army, and they are equipped with the best weapons the empire can provide. They carry matchlock muskets and arquebuses, making them one of the first truly gunpowder-based infantry forces in history. They also carry yataghan swords, curved blades designed for close combat, and they know how to use them. The Janissaries do not break, they do not retreat without orders, and they have never failed to take a fortress when given enough time and support. Ibrahim Pasha will throw them at Kőszeg's walls 19 times over the next month, and 19 times they will come close to breaking through. Supporting the Janissaries are the Sipahi, the Ottoman feudal cavalry. These are heavily armoured horsemen, recruited from landowners who owe military service in exchange for their estates. They are devastating in open battle, the shock troops that shattered the Hungarian cavalry at Mohács. But siege warfare is not what they are built for. Horses cannot charge up ladders or through breaches in walls. The Sipahi will spend most of this siege watching from their camps, frustrated and underemployed, which is part of the problem. Rounding out the force are the Akinja, light cavalry raiders who excel at reconnaissance and terrorizing the countryside, and a massive logistical train of support troops, engineers and specialists. The engineers, the sappers, are particularly important. Ottoman siege warfare in this era relies heavily on mining, the practice of digging tunnels under enemy walls, packing them with gunpowder, and collapsing the fortifications from below. The sappers at Kőszeg will dig dozens of tunnels over the next few weeks, and most of them will fail, either because the defenders countermine or because the waterlogged soil collapses the tunnels prematurely. And then there is the artillery. The Ottomans have brought somewhere between 120 and 180 cannons to Hungary on this campaign, and a significant number of them are now being positioned around Kőszeg. These are not small guns. The largest are massive bronze bombards that fire stone or iron balls weighing 500 kilograms or more. A single hit from one of these can shatter a section of medieval wall. The problem is getting them into position. The muddy ground around Kőszeg makes it almost impossible to place the heavy guns close enough for accurate fire. So the Ottomans have to set up their batteries further back than they would like, which reduces their effectiveness. But even at a distance, the bombardment will be devastating. Inside the fortress, Jurišić has almost nothing to counter this with. His entire garrison consists of roughly 700 to 800 fighting men, depending on how generously you count. 46 of them are professional soldiers, career troops who know what they are doing. The rest are militia, townspeople who have been handed weapons and told to defend their homes. Some of them are Hungarian. Some are German settlers. Some are Croatian, like Jurišić himself. None of them are soldiers by training. They are bakers and blacksmiths and farmers. And over the next month, they are going to learn siege warfare the hardest way possible. Jurišić also has 38 cavalry and 28 hussars, the remnants of his original mobile force. These men are professionals, and they will be critical in the coming weeks, not for fighting, but for leading the sorties that disrupt Ottoman siege works and buy precious time. A few reinforcements trickle in from the Nadajdi estates to the north, adding maybe another 100 men to the garrison, but that is it. No relief force is coming. No resupply is possible once the siege begins. What they have on August 5th is what they will have when it ends. The most glaring weakness is artillery. Kőszeg has no cannons. None. In an era where siege warfare is increasingly dominated by counter-battery fire, where the primary way to stop an enemy bombardment is to destroy their guns with your own, the defenders of Kőszeg have nothing. They have a few arquebuses, maybe 24 muskets, some crossbows. The rest of their weapons are medieval: spears, swords, rocks. Later, as the siege grinds on, they will use anything they can find: kitchen knives, tools, broken timber sharpened into stakes. It is not supposed to be enough. But Jurišić has a plan, or at least the outline of one. He cannot win. Winning is not an option when you are outnumbered more than 100 to 1. But he can delay. Every day Kőszeg holds is a day Suleiman is not marching on Vienna. Every assault the Ottomans launch costs them time and casualties and momentum. And if Jurišić can make the siege expensive enough, if he can drag it out long enough, maybe Suleiman will decide that Vienna is no longer worth the risk. The strategy is simple: use the terrain. The flooded marshland will slow Ottoman assaults and make mining difficult. Use the walls. Every breach the Ottomans create has to be defended in brutal close combat, making them pay for every metre of ground. Use the nights. Ottoman assaults happen during the day, which means the darkness is when you repair the damage, when you shore up the walls and prepare for tomorrow. And most importantly, preserve your fighting strength. Do not waste men on glorious counterattacks or hopeless charges. Fight from behind stone. Make the Ottomans come to you. Kill as many as you can and survive to do it again the next day. It is not a plan that wins wars. It is a plan that buys time. And time is the only thing Jurišić has to sell. The night before the siege begins, August 4th into the 5th, the defenders make their final preparations. Men who know they might be dead in a week are stockpiling rocks and timber near the breaches they know are coming. Women are filling barrels with water because fires will break out and you cannot fight them and the Ottomans at the same time. Children are being moved to the innermost keep, the safest place in the fortress, which is not actually safe, but is the best available. In the churches, priests are hearing confessions. Soldiers who have not prayed in years are praying now. Because when you can see the campfires of 100,000 enemies lighting up the horizon, faith stops being abstract and starts being the only thing between you and panic. Jurišić is moving along the walls, checking positions, making sure every man knows where to go when the bombardment starts. He is not giving speeches. There is nothing to say that will make this easier. His men know the odds. They stayed anyway. Some of them are writing letters they know will never be sent. Last words for families they will probably not see again. Some are sharpening blades that are already sharp, because it gives their hands something to do. Some are just staring out at the Ottoman campfires, watching the enemy settle in for a siege that everyone expects will be over quickly. The Ottomans are not worried. Why would they be? They have taken 17 fortresses already. They have more men, more guns, more of everything. Kőszeg is just another obstacle, and obstacles do not stop empires. Morning comes too fast. The first cannon fires just after dawn on August 5th, 1532, and the sound is a physical thing, a pressure wave that hits you in the chest before your brain registers it as noise. Then another gun fires, then a dozen. Then the bombardment becomes continuous, a rolling thunder that does not stop, and the siege begins. The initial barrage is not aimed at any particular section of wall. It is suppressive fire, meant to keep defenders down while the Ottoman engineers survey the fortress and choose their targets. Stone chips spray from impact points. Dust and smoke roll across the ramparts. Defenders crouch behind merlons, hands over their ears, trying not to think about what happens if a 500-kilogram ball hits their section of wall. By mid-morning, the pattern is established. The Ottoman artillery is set up in a rough semicircle east and south of the fortress.
Far enough back that the muddy ground can support the guns, but close enough to do damage. The bombardment is methodical. Ibrahim Pasha is not wasting ammunition. His gunners are targeting specific sections of wall, the older parts where the masonry is weaker, looking for the point where sustained fire will create a breach. The defenders cannot answer. They have no guns. All they can do is endure and wait for the assault they know is coming. But the assault does not come. Not on the first day. Ibrahim Pasha is patient. He has seen fortresses surrender after a few hours of bombardment, when the garrison realizes resistance is hopeless and decides to take the generous terms while they are still being offered. He sends envoys forward under a white flag, offering Jurišić the chance to surrender with honor. The terms are reasonable. The garrison can leave with their weapons. The civilians will not be harmed. All Kőszeg has to do is open the gates and acknowledge Ottoman sovereignty. Jurišić refuses. The envoys return to Ibrahim Pasha's tent, and the bombardment intensifies. By the second day, the Ottomans are firing systematically at 3 points on the outer town wall, trying to open multiple breaches simultaneously. The noise is constant now, a rhythm the defenders learn to live with. You stop flinching after the first 100 impacts. You stop hoping it will end. You just move through it, doing whatever task you have been assigned, trying not to think about the fact that medieval stone walls were never designed to withstand this kind of punishment. By the third day, August 7th, the first cracks are visible. A section of the outer wall near the eastern gate is starting to crumble, the mortar between stones pulverized by repeated impacts. Jurišić orders men to that section with timber and rubble, shoring it up from the inside, but everyone knows it is temporary. The wall will fall. The only question is when. The Ottomans are also starting their mining operations. Sappers begin digging approach trenches, covered tunnels that will let them get close to the walls without being exposed to defender fire. From these trenches, they will dig the actual mines, tunnels that go under the foundations and get packed with gunpowder. If the mine works, the wall collapses from below, creating an instant breach. If it does not work, you dig another one. The defenders can hear the digging, a faint scraping sound that comes up through the stone. Jurišić organizes counter-mining teams, men who will dig their own tunnels parallel to the Ottoman efforts and try to intercept them. It is dark, claustrophobic, terrifying work. You are crawling through a tunnel barely wide enough for your shoulders, listening for the sound of enemy digging, hoping you break into their tunnel before they break into yours. And if you do intercept them, you fight hand to hand in the darkness with knives and improvised clubs, because there is no room for swords. By August 8th, the defenders have collapsed 2 Ottoman mines by breaking through the walls and flooding them with water from the moat. The sappers drown in their own tunnels, a miserable way to die that does not make the news back in Istanbul. But the Ottomans just start new tunnels. They have the manpower to lose men this way. Jurišić does not. The first major assault comes on August 10th, 5 days into the siege. The eastern section of wall has been pounded for days, and there is finally a breach, a gap maybe 3 meters wide, where the stone has collapsed into rubble. At mid-morning, the Ottoman drums start beating, and the Janissaries form up for the attack.
They advance in columns, disciplined and professional, carrying ladders and pervises, large shields that can stop arrows and musket balls. The plan is simple. Rush the breach, overwhelm the defenders with numbers, secure a foothold inside the walls, then pour more troops through and roll up the defences from the inside. It almost works. The Janissaries reach the breach and start climbing over the rubble. The defenders meet them with everything they have: crossbow bolts, rocks, boiling water carried up from fires the women have been tending since dawn. The fighting at the breach is point blank and brutal. A Janissary gets halfway through and takes a crossbow bolt in the throat. Another makes it all the way inside before a militiaman brains him with a hammer. The defenders are not trying to kill every attacker. They are trying to create a bottleneck, to make the Ottomans pay for every metre, to stack enough bodies in the breach that the next wave has to climb over their own dead. For 2 hours the assault continues. Janissaries push forward, defenders push back. The footing is treacherous, rubble and bodies and blood turning everything slick. Men are slipping, falling, getting trampled. The noise is overwhelming. Screams and clashing metal and the constant background roar of the bombardment, which has not stopped. Finally, around noon, the assault breaks. Not because the Janissaries are defeated, but because Ibrahim Pasha calls them back. He has achieved what he wanted, which is to test the defences and see how hard Jurišić will fight for a breach. The answer is very hard. The Ottomans pull back, leaving maybe 20 dead in and around the breach. The defenders have lost 8 men, which sounds like a victory, until you remember that Jurišić started with 800, and the Ottomans can replace their losses 100 times over. That night, the defenders work in shifts to repair the breach. They cannot rebuild the wall, but they can fill the gap with timber and rubble and create a makeshift barrier that will have to be cleared before the next assault. Wounded men are pulled back to the churches, where there are no doctors, just women doing their best with bandages and prayers. Dead defenders are buried quickly in shallow graves inside the walls. There is no time for proper funerals. By dawn on August 11th, the breach is plugged, and the Ottomans start bombarding it again. The second major assault comes on August 12th, and this time the Ottomans try something different. They have built a siege tower, a mobile wooden structure taller than the walls, designed to let troops attack from above while staying protected. It is an ancient tactic, older than gunpowder, but it still works if the defenders do not have artillery. Kőszeg does not have artillery. What it does have is creativity. As the siege tower is pushed forward toward the walls, defenders on the ramparts use chain shot, 2 weights connected by a chain, swung like a bowler and hurled at the structure. The first few attempts miss. Then one connects with a support beam, and the chain wraps around it with enough force to crack the wood. Another hits the platform where Ottoman archers are supposed to stand. The tower starts to list. Engineers try to stabilize it, but they are exposed now, and the defenders are targeting them with crossbow fire. 3 engineers go down. The tower tips, slowly at first, then faster. It collapses in a cloud of dust and splinters, and the Janissaries who are supposed to use it are left standing in the open with no cover. The assault turns into a massacre. Defender musket fire and crossbows cut down the exposed troops. The Ottomans retreat again, and the siege tower is abandoned where it fell, a monument to failed innovation. The 3rd, 4th and 5th assaults blur together over the next week. The pattern is always the same: dawn bombardment, midday assault, afternoon fighting, evening withdrawal, night repairs.
Each assault is slightly different in execution, but the result is always the same. The Janissaries push forward, the defenders hold, casualties mount on both sides, the walls take more damage, and nobody is winning. By August 15th, 10 days into the siege, the outer town wall is in ruins. Multiple breaches have been opened and repaired and opened again. Sections of wall that were solid stone are now just piles of rubble, held together by timber bracing and desperation. The defenders are rotating positions constantly, pulling exhausted men off the line and replacing them with reserves who are almost as tired. Sleep comes in 2-hour shifts, if it comes at all. Food is running low, water is rationed, and the bombardment never stops. Even at night, the Ottomans fire sporadically, keeping the defenders on edge, making sure no one gets real rest. The mining war continues underground. The Ottomans have shifted tactics, digging multiple tunnels simultaneously to overwhelm the defenders' countermining efforts. On August 13th, one of the mines succeeds. A section of wall near the southern gate collapses in a roar of falling stone and dust, blown apart from below by Ottoman gunpowder. The breach is massive, wide enough for 10 men to enter abreast, and for a moment it looks like the end. Jurišić rallies every available defender to the gap. They do not try to hold the breach itself. They fall back to the inner wall and turn the rubble field into a kill zone. When the Janissaries pour through, expecting to find the town open, they run into concentrated defender fire from 3 directions. The assault stalls in the rubble. The Janissaries take cover and return fire, but they cannot advance, and they cannot stay where they are because the defenders keep throwing rocks and debris down on them from the intact walls to either side. The Ottoman commanders call for a retreat, and the Janissaries pull back, frustrated and bloodied. That night, the defenders do not even try to repair the breach. They just fortify the inner positions and prepare to defend the next layer of walls. The outer defences are gone. The siege has moved into the town itself. By the middle of August, 19 separate assaults have been launched. The exact chronology is murky because the sources do not agree. But what is clear is that Ibrahim Pasha has thrown the Janissaries at these walls over and over, and the walls are still standing. Each assault costs the Ottomans casualties. Not huge numbers in any single attack, but it adds up. The Janissaries are grumbling. This was supposed to be a quick siege, 3 days maybe, and they have been here for 2 weeks with nothing to show for it but dead comrades and a fortress that refuses to fall. Morale is deteriorating. And then the rain starts. Late August in Hungary can bring heavy storms, and 1532 is no exception. The skies open up on August 18th, and the downpour continues for days. The already muddy ground around Kőszeg turns into a swamp. Ottoman supply wagons get bogged down on the roads from the south. Artillery positions that were barely stable before start sinking into the mud. The mines, those carefully dug tunnels, start flooding. Sappers bail water frantically, trying to keep the tunnels from collapsing. But some of them fail anyway, burying men alive in the mud. The rain is equalizing. It makes everyone miserable, attacker and defender alike. But it hurts the Ottomans more because they are the ones trying to maneuver and supply a massive army in the open. The defenders are suffering too. The fortress is not waterproof. Roofs have holes, walls leak. Everything inside is damp and cold, and disease is starting to spread. Dysentery, fevers, the kind of illnesses that kill more soldiers than combat in this era. But the rain also slows the Ottoman bombardment because wet powder does not fire reliably.
and it makes assaults more difficult, because charging through ankle-deep mud while wearing armour is exhausting. For the defenders, the rain is almost a reprieve. Time anchor. 3 weeks into the siege, and nobody expected it to last this long. By August 25th, the situation inside Kőszeg is grim. Jurišić has been wounded, though the sources do not specify when or how badly. He is still commanding, still moving along the walls, but he is limping, and everyone can see it. The garrison has lost somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of its strength. Some dead, some too wounded to fight, some so exhausted they are useless. The 4,000 civilians sheltering in the keep and churches are running out of food. Children are crying from hunger. The wells are still producing water, but it tastes like mud and sickness, and people are getting sick from drinking it. And the Ottomans are still there, still firing, still digging, still preparing for the next assault. Outside the walls, Suleiman is receiving reports that his campaign is in trouble. Not because of Kőszeg specifically, though that is part of it, but because of time. It is late August. He has been in Hungary for 3 months. He has captured towns and fortresses, secured new territory, but he has not achieved his main objective, which was supposed to be Vienna. And now word is reaching him that Charles V has assembled an army at Vienna. 80,000 men, maybe more. The Habsburg Emperor himself is there, commanding, which means this is not a garrison that will collapse under pressure. It is a real army. If Suleiman marches on Vienna now, in late August, with his supply lines overstretched and his best troops exhausted from weeks of siege warfare, he will be facing a fortified city defended by an emperor and 80,000 soldiers. The math no longer works in his favour, and he knows it. But he cannot just withdraw. That would be admitting defeat, and sultans do not admit defeat. So he orders one final push, one overwhelming assault on Kőszeg that will break the defenders and give him at least a symbolic victory to bring home. August 26th. The bombardment intensifies to a level the defenders have not experienced before. Every gun the Ottomans have in position is firing as fast as the crews can load. The noise is apocalyptic. Stone walls that have stood for 3 weeks are finally giving up, collapsing in clouds of dust that hang in the humid air. Multiple breaches open along the inner walls. The defenders are being pushed back, street by street, toward the central keep. The 16th, 17th and 18th assaults happen in rapid succession, barely separated, a continuous wave of janissaries pouring through the breaches. The fighting spreads into the town itself, brutal close combat in narrow streets and around barricades the defenders have erected. Women are throwing rocks and debris from upper windows. Old men are wielding kitchen knives. This is not organised defence anymore. This is desperation. Everyone fighting because there is nowhere left to run. Jurišić is everywhere, limping from position to position, rallying men who are too tired to stand, but stand anyway, because their captain is still standing. By the evening of August 27th, Ottoman troops have gained a foothold inside the inner walls. They are fighting around the churches now, pushing the defenders back toward the keep. For the first time since the siege began, it looks like the end. The defenders are out of space, out of options. The Ottomans are inside, and there is no inner wall left to fall back to. That night is the worst of the siege. Defenders know this is probably their last night alive. Some are still fighting. Some have collapsed from exhaustion. In the church of St. Jakab, according to legend, a wedding is taking place.
A young couple, Marko Balint and his bride Margit, decided that if they are going to die, they will die married. The priest conducts the ceremony while the sounds of fighting echo through the stone walls. The congregation is mostly women and children, people who have nowhere else to go, and they are dressed in their best clothes, because if this is the end, they will face it with dignity. The ceremony finishes just before dawn on August 28th. The bride and groom step out into a town that is falling apart. Ottoman Janissaries are less than 100 meters away, consolidating their positions for what everyone assumes will be the final assault. And then something strange happens. The final assault begins at dawn on August 28th. Janissaries advance from multiple directions, confident that this is the breakthrough. They push forward into the streets around the keep, expecting minimal resistance from a garrison that should be broken by now. Instead, they run into a surge of defenders that seems to come from nowhere. The congregation from St. Jakab has poured out of the church, and they are attacking with whatever they can grab. The bride, Margit, is reportedly in the lead, still in her wedding dress, wielding something between a club and a piece of broken timber. Behind her are women and old men and anyone else who decided that dying in a church is worse than dying on your feet. The Janissaries are veterans. They have seen desperate counterattacks before. But there is something unnerving about this one. Something about the sheer noise and chaos of civilians charging at them with no formation and no tactics, just rage and fear turned into violence. The defenders are screaming, women are wailing, children are crying. The sound echoes off the stone walls, amplified and distorted, and in the smoke and confusion it is impossible to tell how many people are actually fighting. According to Jurišić's own account, written in a letter to Ferdinand after the siege, the Ottomans heard the wailing of women and children and believed that Kőszeg had hidden reinforcements, soldiers concealed in the houses and cellars who were now pouring out to counterattack. It is a rational mistake. The Janissaries have been fighting for 3 weeks. They are exhausted, their nerves are frayed, and now they are hearing sounds that suggest a much larger force than they expected. Some of them start to fall back. Not a rout, not even a retreat, just a hesitation, a momentary loss of momentum. But momentum is everything in an assault, and once it stops, it is almost impossible to restart. There is also the legend, recorded by multiple chroniclers in the years after the siege, that the defenders saw a vision of St. Martin. According to these accounts, a figure on horseback appeared above the fortress, dressed in shining armour and carrying a flaming sword. The Ottomans saw it too, and it terrified them. 5 townspeople swore they saw the same thing, St. Martin arriving to defend his town at the moment of greatest need. The more pragmatic explanation is that the Janissaries, exhausted and unnerved, saw something in the smoke and confusion, and their minds filled in the rest. Humans are good at seeing patterns, especially when they are scared. A trick of light, a defender on horseback silhouetted against a fire. Anything can become a miracle if you are desperate enough to believe in one. What matters is not whether the vision was real. What matters is that the assault broke. The Janissaries pulled back, and this time they did not regroup for another push. They fell back to their siege lines and refused further orders. The Ottoman officers try to rally them, but the Janissaries are done. They have been attacking this fortress for weeks, and it is still standing. And they are tired of dying for a town that nobody has ever heard of. Ibrahim Pasha realizes he has a problem. His best troops are on the edge of mutiny. His supply lines are stretched thin.
The rain has turned the roads into mud. And Suleiman is receiving intelligence from Vienna that makes it clear a siege there is no longer feasible. On August 28th, after the final assault collapses, Ibrahim Pasha sends an envoy to Jurišić requesting a parley. The two commanders meet under a flag of truce. Jurišić is wounded, visibly exhausted, barely able to stand, but he is still in command. Ibrahim offers terms, not generous terms, not a full surrender, just a face-saving compromise that will let both sides claim a version of victory. The Ottomans will be allowed to enter Kőszeg symbolically. They will raise their banner. Suleiman will be able to report to Istanbul that Kőszeg fell, which is technically true if you squint at the definition of fell. In exchange, Jurišić retains control of the fortress. His garrison does not have to surrender their weapons or evacuate. The civilians are not harmed. It is a nominal surrender, a piece of political theatre that costs Jurišić nothing real and gives the Ottomans an excuse to leave. Jurišić accepts. What else is he going to do? He has bought 25 days. Vienna is safe. His job is done. On August 29th, a small detachment of Ottoman soldiers enters Kőszeg and raises the crescent banner over the walls. It stays up for a few hours, then they take it down and leave. Suleiman's official dispatches will report that Kőszeg surrendered, and technically that is not a lie. The truth is more complicated, but the truth usually is. On August 30th, the Ottoman army breaks camp and begins its withdrawal. Not a rout, not even a retreat in the military sense, just a recognition that the campaign is over and continuing toward Vienna is no longer worth the cost. The army marches south, back toward Ottoman Hungary, leaving behind siege works and abandoned equipment and a fortress that should have fallen in 3 days, but held for nearly a month. The defenders watch from the walls, too exhausted to celebrate. Some of them collapse as soon as they see the last Ottoman banner disappear over the hills. Some just sit down where they are standing and do not move for hours. Jurišić stays on the walls until he is certain the Ottomans are actually leaving, because he has seen enough sieges to know that withdrawals can be feints. Only when the scouts report that the enemy is truly gone does he allow himself to believe it. Kőszeg has survived. Barely. But survival is enough. The human cost of the siege is difficult to calculate because the sources do not agree on numbers, and nobody was keeping careful records while they were fighting for their lives. What we know is that the defenders suffered heavy casualties. Out of an initial garrison of 700 to 800 fighting men, somewhere between 200 and 400 were killed, or wounded badly enough that they could not return to duty. That is a casualty rate of 30 to 50%, devastating by any measure. The 4,000 civilians sheltering in the fortress also suffered, though mostly from disease and hunger rather than direct combat. How many died is not recorded, which tells you something about how medieval chroniclers valued civilian lives. The Ottoman casualties are even harder to pin down. The official Ottoman accounts downplay losses, as you would expect, and the European sources exaggerate them, also as you would expect. What seems clear is that the Janissary Corps took significant losses over the course of 19 assaults. Not catastrophic losses, not enough to cripple the Ottoman army, but enough that Ibrahim Pasha had to pull them back before they mutinied. Estimates range from a few hundred to over 1,000 Janissaries killed, with many more wounded. The siege also cost the Ottomans time, which is harder to quantify, but arguably more important. 25 days spent at Kőszeg was 25 days not spent marching on Vienna. By the time the Ottoman army withdrew on August 30th, it was too late in the campaign season to launch a siege of a major city. Winter comes early in Central Europe, and an army besieging Vienna in September or October is asking to be caught by the weather, with no supplies and no shelter. Suleiman learned that lesson in 1529. He was not going to repeat it. Nikola Jurišić survived the siege, though his wounds took months to heal. Ferdinand I did not forget what he had done. On November 9th, 1532, Jurišić was granted a baronial title, ownership of Kőszeg castle, and extensive estates in the surrounding region. He became a hero of Christendom, celebrated in Vienna and Rome and across Catholic Europe, as the man who saved Vienna without Vienna even being attacked. His career continued. In 1537, after distinguishing himself at the Battle of Gorjani, he was made Supreme Commander of Slavonia and Lower Austria, one of the highest military positions in the Habsburg hierarchy. Between 1538 and 1543, he served as captain of Carniola, defending the southern border against Ottoman raids. He spent his final years as a secret advisor at the Habsburg court in Vienna, a position of influence, if not formal power. He died sometime between 1543 and 1545 at Kőszeg, in the castle he had defended and been granted as a reward. The sources are not clear on the exact date or cause of death. He was probably in his early 50s, old for a soldier in that era, and the wounds from the siege likely contributed. But he lived long enough to see that his defence mattered, that the 25 days had changed something. The battlefield itself, the ruins of Kőszeg, became a monument almost immediately. The walls were so badly damaged that large sections had to be completely rebuilt over the next few years. The outer town wall, which had borne the brunt of the bombardment, was essentially reconstructed from scratch. The breaches were filled in, the rubble was cleared. But the scars remained visible for generations. You could walk the walls in 1550 or 1600 and still see where Ottoman cannonballs had struck, where mines had collapsed sections of foundation, where desperate repairs had been made with whatever materials were available. The fortress itself became a pilgrimage site of sorts. Travellers would stop to see the place where 800 men had held off the Ottoman Empire, and local guides would tell increasingly embellished stories about the siege, adding details that probably were not true, but felt true, which is sometimes more important. The Ottoman siege works, the trenches and artillery positions and mining tunnels, were gradually reclaimed by the earth. Within a decade, you could barely tell where the camps had been. Nature is efficient that way. The moats remained flooded, because the defensive system that had saved Kőszeg once might be needed again. And it almost was. The Ottoman-Habsburg wars continued for another century and a half, with the frontier shifting back and forth across Hungary. Kőszeg was threatened multiple times, but never besieged again on the scale of 1532. It is as if both sides remembered what happened and decided it was not worth trying again. In 1777, a fire destroyed much of the castle, and it was rebuilt in a style that bears little resemblance to what Jurišić defended. The fortress you can visit today is a reconstruction, historically inspired, but not historically accurate. The town of Kőszeg itself adopted a tradition to commemorate the siege. Every day at 11 in the morning, the church bells ring, marking the hour when, according to legend, the last Ottoman troops left the town on August 30th, 1532. The tradition started in 1777 and continues to this day. The clocks in the town's main square are permanently set to 11 o'clock, Frozen at the moment, Kőszeg was saved. The immediate strategic consequences of Kőszeg's survival rippled outward faster than anyone expected. By mid-September 1532, the Ottoman army had withdrawn deep into Ottoman Hungary, and Suleiman had returned to Istanbul without the victory he had promised. Vienna was never besieged. The relief army that Charles V had assembled, 80,000 men gathered from across the Holy Roman Empire, arrived at Vienna on September 23rd to find that there was no siege to relieve. The Ottomans were already gone, and the threat had passed. For the Habsburgs, this was as close to a victory as they were likely to get.
They had not defeated Suleiman in open battle, but they had stopped his advance, which was almost as good. Ferdinand I immediately moved to reoccupy some of the territories the Ottomans had taken during their march north, reclaiming towns and fortresses that had been briefly under Ottoman control. The following year, in July of 1533, Suleiman and Ferdinand signed the Treaty of Constantinople, which formalized the partition of Hungary. John Zapolya was confirmed as king of all Hungary, at least in title, but Ferdinand was recognized as holding the western and northern territories he currently controlled. It was a compromise that satisfied no one and guaranteed future conflict, but it also established a kind of equilibrium.
The treaty acknowledged what the siege of Kőszeg had demonstrated, that the Ottoman Empire could not simply roll over the Habsburgs, and the Habsburgs could not expel the Ottomans from Hungary. The border would remain contested for the next century and a half. One of the more humiliating aspects of the treaty, from Ferdinand's perspective, was that his status was downgraded. In Ottoman eyes, he was not an emperor or even a king. He was equivalent to the Grand Vizier, a high-ranking official, but not a sovereign equal to the Sultan. It was a diplomatic insult designed to remind the Habsburgs of their place in the hierarchy. And it worked. Ferdinand fumed, but he signed the treaty anyway, because the alternative was another war he could not afford. The treaty established an 8-year truce, which gave both sides time to rebuild and prepare for the next round of conflict. And there would be a next round. There always was. But for 8 years the frontier was relatively quiet, and that mattered. The military lessons of Kőszeg spread quickly through Europe. Fortress design started to change, incorporating some of the features that had made Kőszeg so difficult to take. The integrated castle and town defence, where the entire settlement is treated as a single fortified complex rather than just the central keep, became more common. The use of terrain as a weapon, deliberately flooding approaches and creating marshland barriers, was studied and copied. Engineers realized that a small fortress in a good position, defended by a determined garrison, could delay even the largest army if the defender was willing to pay the cost. It was not a pleasant lesson. The cost at Kőszeg had been horrific, but it was a lesson that worked. And in an era where the Ottoman Empire seemed unstoppable, European commanders were desperate for anything that worked. The countermining techniques that Jurišić's men had used also became more widespread. The idea of listening for enemy sappers and digging intercepting tunnels was not new, but Kőszeg demonstrated how effective it could be even with a tiny garrison. Manuals on siege warfare published in the decades after 1532 include sections on countermining that reference Kőszeg as a case study. Only 4 fortresses successfully resisted major Ottoman sieges during this period, and Kőszeg was the first. The others were Temesvar in 1551, Eger in 1552, and Sigedvar in 1556, though Sigedvar fell eventually at enormous cost. Each of these sieges reinforced the lesson that defence was possible, that the Ottomans were not invincible, that buying time was a viable strategy even when winning was not. In a larger sense, Kőszeg contributed to a shift in how Europeans thought about the Ottoman threat. For decades, the narrative had been one of inevitable Ottoman expansion, of Christian Europe slowly being swallowed by an empire that was militarily superior in almost every way. Kőszeg did not disprove that narrative, but it complicated it. It showed that the Ottomans could be stopped, not through grand alliances or crusades, but through stubborn local resistance and the intelligent use of terrain and fortifications. It was not an inspiring message. It was a grim one. But grim messages are useful when you are losing. The political ripples extended beyond the immediate theatre of war. The Protestant Reformation, which was fracturing the Holy Roman Empire and dividing Christian Europe along religious lines, survived partly because the Habsburgs were distracted by the Ottoman threat. Charles V and Ferdinand I spent the 1530s dealing with Suleiman, which meant they could not devote their full resources to crushing the Lutheran princes in Germany. The Peace of Nuremberg, signed in 1532, just before the Ottoman invasion, granted temporary toleration to Protestants, specifically because the Habsburgs needed unity against the Ottomans. If Suleiman had taken Vienna in 1532, if the Ottoman threat had intensified rather than stabilized, the history of the Reformation might have been very different. This is one of those counterfactuals that historians love to argue about, but the timing is suggestive. The delay at Kőszeg bought time not just for Vienna, but for the entire political and religious landscape of Central Europe. The partition of Hungary that was formalized in 1533 lasted for generations. Royal Habsburg Hungary in the north and west, Ottoman Hungary in the centre, and Transylvania as an Ottoman vassal state in the east became the political reality for over 150 years. That division shaped migration patterns, cultural development, and religious identity across the region. Ottoman Hungary became increasingly Islamic, with mosques and Turkish baths and administrative system imported from Istanbul. Habsburg Hungary remained Catholic, though with a significant Protestant minority that the Habsburgs periodically tried to suppress. Transylvania became a haven for religious minorities, including Unitarians and Calvinists, because its princes needed to balance between Ottoman and Habsburg pressure and could not afford to alienate any potential allies. This three-way partition would not end until the late 17th century, when another siege of Vienna in 1683 finally broke the stalemate and led to the gradual Habsburg reconquest of Hungary. But that is a different story. Suleiman the Magnificent never attempted another direct assault on Vienna during the remaining 34 years of his reign. He launched other campaigns into Hungary, captured more fortresses, extended Ottoman control deeper into the Balkans. But the momentum was gone. The sense that the Ottoman Empire could simply march wherever it wanted and take whatever it desired had been damaged at Kőszeg, and it never fully recovered. Suleiman died in 1566 at the age of 71, during yet another siege in Hungary, this one at Szigetvár. He did not live to see the fortress fall, dying in his tent of natural causes just days before the defenders were finally overwhelmed. His death was kept secret until the army could withdraw safely, because even dead, the Sultan's authority held the empire together. Ibrahim Pasha, who had commanded the siege at Kőszeg, did not live nearly as long. In 1536, 4 years after Kőszeg, he was executed on Suleiman's orders, strangled with a silk cord in the palace. The exact reasons are murky.
tangled up in court politics and the intrigues of Suleiman's wife Hürrem. But the failure to take Vienna and the delays at fortresses like Kőszeg had damaged Ibrahim's reputation. He had accumulated too much power and too many enemies, and eventually that combination became lethal. Whether the siege of Kőszeg contributed directly to his downfall is impossible to say, but it did not help. For the people of Kőszeg, life slowly returned to something resembling normal, though normal is a relative term when you have spent a month being bombarded by the largest army in the world. The town rebuilt, the population recovered, but the memory of the siege became part of the town's identity, a defining moment that separated before from after. The civilians who had sheltered in the churches, the militia who had fought on the walls, the women who had carried water and stones and whatever else was needed, they all carried the siege with them for the rest of their lives. Some of them probably told the stories to their children and grandchildren, embellishing over time until the facts blurred into legend. That is how St. Martin's apparition entered the historical record, and how the bride, Margit, became a folk hero, and how 800 defenders became a symbol of resistance against impossible odds. The truth is impressive enough without the embellishments, but humans need legends, especially when the truth is just people being scared and stubborn, and refusing to quit even when quitting makes sense. Kőszeg gave Europe a legend it desperately needed in 1532, and the fact that the legend was built on something real made it all the more powerful. Centuries later, you can still visit Kőszeg. The town is quiet now, a small city in western Hungary near the Austrian border, known more for its wine and its Baroque architecture than for its military history. Tourists walk the streets where janissaries fought and died. They climb the walls where Jurišić stood, wounded and exhausted, watching the Ottoman army approach. The castle is a museum now, filled with exhibits about the siege and the town's history, carefully curated and well maintained. The church of St. Jakab still stands, though it has been rebuilt and renovated so many times that almost nothing from 1532 remains. You can stand where the wedding supposedly took place, where the congregation poured out into the street to fight. But the stones you are standing on are not the same stones. The moats are mostly dry now, filled in or reduced to decorative water features. The marshland that made the Ottoman assault so difficult has been drained and turned into farmland. The scars of the siege have been erased by time and reconstruction, and the simple fact that modern life does not care much about medieval fortifications. But every day at 11 in the morning, the bells ring. The sound echoes across the town square, and for a moment, if you know the history, you can almost imagine what it must have felt like to hear those bells on August 30th, 1532, marking the moment when the last Ottoman troops left and the impossible siege finally ended. The clocks in the square are still set to 11, a permanent memorial to a temporary victory. Most of the people who live in Kőszeg probably do not think much about the siege anymore. It is history, old and distant, something that happened to other people in another world. But the bells keep ringing, and the clocks stay frozen, and the memory persists because 700 men decided that mathematics could be wrong, that numbers do not always win, and that sometimes stubbornness is enough. They were not heroes in the classical sense. They were people in an impossible situation who chose to stand instead of run, and that choice changed everything that came after. Vienna survived. Austria survived. The Ottoman advance into Central Europe ended not with a great battle,
but with a small fortress that refused to fall. August 5th, 1532. Captain Nikola Jurišić stood on these walls and watched an empire approach, and he made the decision that would define the rest of his life and alter the course of European history. He could not have known what would come of it. He was just trying to survive the next day. But survival, it turns out, was enough.